Hi, I'm Ken Fisher. Welcome to the 19th season of CityWide. My guest on this edition of CityWide is Michael Miller, Executive Vice President and CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, JCRC. Welcome to CityWide.
Thanks very much, Ken.
There are probably a lot of viewers who have seen your face at press conferences, may have heard about some of the activities of the JCRC, but for, I think, a lot of our viewers, even Jewish viewers, they don't actually know what the JCRC is. So give us just a little bit of an overview.
I'll attempt to do it in just a couple of sentences, but the organization is an umbrella organization in New York for now about 55 different Jewish organizations spanning the spectrum within our faith, from the more liberal, even the more secular, to the more devout. Organizations such as the New York chapters of the Anti-Defamation League, the American Jewish Committee, Hadassah, National Council of Jewish Women, the synagogue movements that I just referred to before, Reformed, Conservative, Orthodox, Reconstructionist. And we are to be the face of the Jewish community, the organized Jewish community, and all these organizations that are affiliates of ours on the community relations agenda. So, of course, you could ask me, what's community relations? Community relations, in our interpretation of the term, includes it matters between the among the Jewish community, Jew to Jew, as well as Jew to non-Jew, intergroup relations. And, of course, advocacy for a strong and secure Israel. And in terms of just the very presence of the community here in New York, to ensure its own safety. The safety of Israel, yes, but that's 6,000 miles away. What about the safety and security of the Jewish community here in New York? So unofficially, we serve as liaisons to law enforcement, both local NYPD, national, FBI, et cetera. The largest department within the organization is the department which reaches out beyond the Jewish community to the multiples of different ethnic and religious communities who now reside in New York. When we were kids, giving away our age, there were 2 million Jews out of about 6 million plus New Yorkers. Now in the city, we're talking about the 5 boroughs, there are 1 million Jews out of 8.25+ million New Yorkers. So our numbers have diminished, and therefore, as well as our neighbors have increased, and they're coming from all around the world, from Spanish-speaking countries to Africa to Asia. It's just an amazing amalgam that we have in the city, and our job on behalf of the Jewish community is to get to know each and every one of those communities. Not every New Yorker, but at least the organizations represent them.
Let me give you an example, what I think of from current events, very current events, that may help people understand what this means in the real world. You have gone to bed thinking about the fact that at any moment the Senate Intelligence Committee can release a report accusing the CIA of torture and a cover-up, which could have huge ramifications for Israel, for Americans in the Middle East, as well as in the United States. And you wake up to a report that and this is while the Garner and Ferguson police protests are taking part around the country and the city, you wake up to a report that an African-American man has gone into the world headquarters of the Lubavitcher movement looking to kill a Jew, which he attempts to do with a knife, has been shot by a police officer. After you open up the book of Job and say, why me, God? What do you do? What is the JCRC's role in sort of circumstances like that?
That's an excellent question. I'll give you a very pragmatic response. So what did I do when I woke up to that? The first thing that I did was communicate with my staff. We have sufficient staff, very trained and skilled staff, to be able to assign them various responsibilities. One of them was to go directly out to Crown Heights. Another, and to really to work within the framework of the Jewish community, which of course was reeling from that attack. Scared, and 2 weeks after the attack in Israel, the butchering of 4 rabbis in a synagogue in Jerusalem. So you can well imagine the trepidation out there in the community. So one staff member goes out there. Another staff member reaches out into the non-Jewish community, to the various black communities, both Caribbean American and African American, with whom we have developed relationships, particularly since the 1991 riots in Crown Heights, riots that we have referred to even as a pogrom. My role at the outset is to serve as the quarterback. And as well as like a filter for various other calls from the mayor's office, calls from representatives of other elected officials.
Law enforcement. Law
enforcement as well, and particularly law enforcement in this regard. It was determined by my staff member out in the field that it was probably going to be valuable to hold a press conference. A press conference with whom? So the partner in this instance was the borough president of Brooklyn, Eric Adams, who's a former police officer himself. So who would be at the press conference? Who would be representative of the Jewish community other than myself? So eventually I made it out there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon for that press conference. And then subsequent to that, my other staff member had a meeting of something called Project CARE, which we were pivotal in establishing, which has brought black and Jewish leadership together to talk about the issues, the basic quality of life issues within Crown Heights that can serve as a gelling factor for people to be able to relate one to the other. We're in the community relations business. So just to sum up, my relationship with my own staff is important, yes, but a relationship with the Jewish community in Crown Heights, with the non-Jewish community in Crown Heights, with elected officialdom, as we refer to it, with law enforcement, all of that working together to ensure that there's a day after, an evening after all of this turmoil. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work as well. Yesterday, thank God, it seemed to have worked, and the reassurances, particularly coming from the mayor and the police commissioner, really hit home.
This is not just out of a vacuum. This has been years of work by the organization to win the trust of what are often insular communities, particularly among the Orthodox, law enforcement that often feels besieged, certainly communities who feel aggrieved by the Jewish communities with whom they are neighbors. We have decades of mistrust in New York. So you alluded to the Crown Heights riots, and that may have been the nadir. Have things gotten better? Are there still those tensions? And how did you ever convince people that you could serve as a sort of an honest broker in these instances?
Those are loaded questions, and it's also 2 decades worth of work, actually work even prior to the riots, let alone subsequent to the riots. It's very difficult to analyze how you establish a reputation. But part of it is being credible, being believable, being honest. And I think that's what this organization does in terms of our relationships. We don't give anything away. I wish we had money to give away. We don't. We work on a shoestring budget.
You're not a social service organization. You're not doing casework.
And what's important for the viewers to also understand is that we do not take a penny of government dollars. There are many elected officials who would want to give us grants. We want our relationship with government, such as when you were in the city council, to be strictly on the issues, not for the sake of nothing wrong with receiving government dollars, but it really alters our attitude and back and forth, the attitude between government and the not-for-profit sector. So it's pretty much spade work done over the years to always be there for the communities. There have been incidents that have impacted on the black community and the Latino community, another community that's not very well known here in the New York area, the Sikh community. And there were Sikhs who were attacked post 9/11 because they appeared to be bin Laden-like. And so we have stood there for them, and also the fact that we are as organized as we are. Many communities say, oh wow, we want to model, I had a meeting about that just yesterday, we want to model after the Jewish community. And part of that is just the warmth that we hope to express and to be responded to.
Your staff is limited, the needs are great. You have a program to train young people.
Yes, we do.
To do community relations. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we have fellowships, we call them, in Brooklyn and Queens and in the Bronx. Right now we'll be starting something up in North Manhattan as well. Intergroup relations fellowships to identify young people. It depends how you define young, but certainly from my age, 25 to 40-year-olds who come out of the community. Of course, there'll be members of the Jewish community there, many of them coming from immigrant populations like the Russian-speaking community, but from all the other segments of the community as well. About 20, 25 per fellowship. A whole year-long course in learning the skills of intergroup relations. It's not something which might come naturally to people, but it's not that there's not a skill set associated with it, something that you really need to learn, need to study. They also learn how to engage in philanthropy, not to bring money to the JCRC, but they raise money to give away to another organization. It's a fascinating program, very successful. We've had several hundred graduates, and for the fact that Northern Manhattan is crying out for it, and Staten Island might be the next on the list. So we're there, and that's also part of building the network of relationships. It's not just dealing with the grass tops, but it's dealing with the grassroots. It's not just dealing with the CityWides. Everybody knows the CityWides representatives. It's really who's on the ground in the neighborhoods. Those are the folks that we really need to get to know.
You also provide, I'd call it technical support. You're the go-to people. So if there's a crisis and City Hall needs to reach somebody and they don't know who to talk to, they call you and say, who can we trust? If a Jewish organization needs an architect, a lawyer, an accountant, or whatever, it's outside their range of experience, they call you, they say, who can you trust?
Actually, I've joked around over the years, although it's kind of dated by now, is we're like the Ghostbusters organization in the Jewish community. You don't know who to go to, you call the Ghostbusters. So people will call us and we'll farm it out, exactly what you're talking about, to one of our own member organizations, let's say to the ADL, the American Jewish Committee, or somebody along those lines, to one of the synagogal groups, to one of the Jewish community councils, the COJOs, councils of Jewish organizations, or we'll take it on ourselves. As an example, we also have a legal assistance to Jewish organizations project within the JCRC. Our general counsel is responsible for that. We provide pro bono legal assistance, not criminal, but civil law, to not only the organizations that affiliate with us, but all not-for-profit Jewish organizations in New York.
I want to talk a little bit about the changing nature of the Jewish community in New York when CityWide continues right after this. Welcome back to CityWide. We're speaking with Michael Miller, Executive Vice President, CEO of the JCRC, that's the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. Michael, at the top half of the show, you referenced the fact that the Jewish population has shrunk while the city's population has grown over the last couple of decades. But within the Jewish community, there's been another trend, which is the percentage of Orthodox and Hasidic Jews compared to more secular-oriented Jews. How extensive is that, and how has that sort of changed both the issues and the kinds of approaches that JCRC has had to make?
It doesn't really change a tremendous amount, just different players on the deck as to who you're going to be relating to. In terms of the projects remain pretty much intact.
But an issue, for example, support for yeshivas, public support for yeshivas in various forms. I would expect that is a higher priority now for some of your member organizations than it might have been when the predominant synagogues were less Orthodox?
The answer is yes, but it's not necessarily a JCRC issue. What we try to do, considering we represent the left and the right, the liberals and the conservatives, is to try to find that golden mean down the middle of the road. And when it comes to church-state related issues, we generally take a pass. Because we can't achieve a consensus around those issues. My own children went to day school, so trust me, I understand the burden of the financial obligation. And on the other hand, in terms of my organizational role, I try to remain neutral and are consulted by both sides. Actually, in fact, at the organization, we've had consultations on the subject without arriving at a position for the organization. I also, just within the framework of the more newfound presence of the Orthodox community in New York, is interesting that many of the major elected officials in New York City have as their liaisons members of the Orthodox population.
Is that because they vote as voting blocks?
I think it has a lot to do with knowledge of the system. It's something that members of the Orthodox community are fascinated by. Maybe others are as well. But I just reference it as a phenomenon. Going back, since we go back quite a while, that certainly was not the case. Some exceptions, of course, but it's not just in Brooklyn. It's outside of Brooklyn as well, even up in the Bronx. So again, it's a Bronx population. Let's just talk about that for a moment, which was my home borough. Is in 1948, my late father was a rabbi in the Bronx, said to me that the nascent state of Israel had 600,000 Jews, and when it was created on May 14th, 1948, and in the Bronx there were 600,000 Jews in 1948. And today in Israel there are more than 6 million Jews, and in the Bronx there are less than 60,000 Jews.
Speaking of Israel, I would think that that's an issue where it's almost as hard to achieve consensus. We have a variety of Jewish intellectuals, more secular synagogues, even some very ultra-Orthodox Hasidic organizations that are critical of the course of conduct that Israel has taken. There obviously is a large pro-Israel, pro-Zionist network in New York. Where do you fit in that? You support the state of Israel, but on the other hand, it's not necessarily a consensus issue.
There are always going to be outliers. There will always be those on the further to the right, those further to the left, etc. But there's a very comfortable middle. I think it bore out during the course of the summer Operation Protective Edge when we, on very short notice, called for a rally in Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza. And there were 20,000 people who came from across the spectrum, from liberal to conservative. To us, that was very, very important, including the speakers at the podium. Within the framework of the Jewish community, within the framework of the non-Jewish community, there were outstanding representatives standing up at the podium, Black, Latino, Asian. But within the framework of the Jewish, which you're referencing now, it might be a bit more challenging, but that's what all these gray hairs are for. It's not easy working within our own population.
One of the things you and I have talked about off the show is the changing perception of Israel among young Jews in America. That and I generally don't get into Middle Eastern politics where people have been fighting for 5,000 years over a placement of a comma. It's just not my area of expertise. But I watch young people watching what's happening in Israel and in the Middle East with Palestine issues, and I see young Jews saying to me that it is an apartheid country and that they don't agree with what the state of Israel. It's not a blind loyalty to Israel anymore. Is that just the people I'm meeting? Is it a widespread problem? Is it a legitimate concern? Is it a concern that even if the perception is misplaced, that it's having an impact?
I can't tell you how widespread it is, but it is a concern, a deep concern within our own community to ensure that the next generation, that younger generation, the college-age generation in particular, and younger, receive a sufficient sufficiently knowledgeable education on Israel, and many don't. And therefore, they can be susceptible to points of view that are anathema to where we stand. We dedicate a significant amount of our resources to dealing with the college campus and wrestling with those issues. But there are bright spots as well. And one of them is that we established, actually it was established, we inherited something called the Council of Young Jewish Presidents. These are the presidents of young leadership organizations, organizations that include individuals like in the 20 to 40 age range, who are dedicating themselves to speaking to their own cadre about issues of importance to the Jewish community, including Israel. So it isn't just the organizational community of the established groups, but it's also the nascent groups that are stepping forward. So I'm somewhat optimistic. There are a lot who are not. I like to remain optimistic. Otherwise, we'll just throw up our hands and walk away from the situation. That's not sufficient for me. That's not acceptable to me.
You're a community relations professional. I don't know that there's a school you can go to do that.
The School of Hard Knocks.
Yeah, your path to this position starts off, I think, in a very different place. So, by background, you are in fact an ordained rabbi, although you don't have a congregation. But if I'm correct, your first or earliest sort of robes were drab olive. So, can you talk a little bit about your background and how you wound up where you're sitting?
Okay. Well, how much time do we have?
A minute.
Yes, I wanted to dedicate my rabbinate initially to outreach. And so I volunteered to join the United States Army as a United States Army chaplain. And it wasn't very popular at that time. I volunteered at the end of the Vietnam War, a war against which I demonstrated. But we had Jews in the military. They needed to be served. And so I joined the force. I'm a third-generation American soldier. My grandfather served in the Spanish-American War. My father served as a chaplain in World War II. And I volunteered at the end of the Vietnam War. And I served active duty for 2 years. And subsequently received an appointment in Springfield, Massachusetts to be an assistant rabbi youth director. And then from there graduated to become the rabbi of the synagogue. And I worked 24/7, and I volunteered to play a role with the local federation, the Jewish Federation. And in that capacity, of course, they put me on the committee, and then I became the chair of the committee. And in that capacity, there was an opportunity to go behind the Iron Curtain in 1983, when there was an Iron Curtain during the Andropov years. The other rabbis I was to go behind the Iron Curtain with canceled last minute, but my late father was an American Jewish leader. I said, as a rabbi, he was one of the founders of the Soviet Jewry movement here in America, and they said, oh, you're Izzy Miller's son, you can handle it. So I went behind the Iron Curtain, smuggling religious paraphernalia into USSR on my own. And after that 2-week experience, which you don't have time to go into next time, after that 2-week experience, I said, this is what I want to do with my life. I give up the pulpit. I want to work for the Jewish community. And I was very fortunate, long story short, very fortunate to have gotten the appointment in 1984 as the Director of Israel International Affairs of the JCRC, and then my predecessor, Malcolm Hoenlein, I'm sure is known to many of your viewers, your Jewish viewers at least, that he went over to the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations. I drew the short straw and I got the job. So I've been the exec since October 1st, 1986.
So you are considered not just one of the most influential Jews in New York, you're considered among the political community, the media, other opinion leaders as one of the most influential New Yorkers. So as that influential New Yorker, how do you think Bill DeBlasio is doing with the Jewish community? And if there was one thing that you wanted to say to Bill DeBlasio that you thought was more important than anything else at this moment in time on behalf of the Jewish community, what would that be?
I think he's doing well with the Jewish community. Just when we had that incident in Crown Heights, he put through several phone calls, and one of them was to me. And I appreciate that greatly. I've had a relationship with him since even before he was a city council member.
Had that happened before with mayors?
Not in a while. And I have excellent relationship with Mike Bloomberg and Rudy Giuliani, Dave Dinkins, Ed Koch. It shows almost like a retail orientation, person-to-person orientation of this particular mayor. I don't mean to be critical of any other mayor. His statements on Israel have been excellent, very supportive. His concern for the welfare of the Jewish communities here in New York, I say communities because we're not one community, we're multiple communities, is there. When we see each other, he asks questions about the Jewish community, and it might sound a little silly, but my point to him is a matter of thanks. When we spoke about the Crown Heights situation, I asked him, have you put out a statement? And he said, yeah, we just put one out. I went to the press conference. I looked at my emails after the press conference. He himself sent me as an FYI from his email account his statement. And on the subway back to my office, I wrote a thank you note to him for that. And I mean, that's the kind of a mayor that we have in the city of New York, though those who disagree with his political orientation, fine. My concern as the CEO of my organization is that he be sensitive to the needs within the Jewish community of New York. To date, he's been there, and we look forward to continuing that relationship.
My thanks to Michael Miller, Executive Vice President and CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, JCRC. I'm Ken Fisher. Thanks for joining us on this edition of CityWide. Send your comments and suggestions to CityWide at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or contact us at cuny.tv.